Welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast.
Round 13 of the Motogp train has ended us up in southern Italy in Misano. Now, Misano is one of the good ones to go to if you are a fan, and luckily this year we have two. This week and in 2 weeks' time, next week, the next round is replacing Kazakhstan. Most people at this point will know. We might touch a bit later on that, but we're going to jump straight into Moto 3. Early doors race, for me, I felt that Misano is always a bit of a difficult track for a lot of reasons. It's narrow, it's stop-start, so I wasn't sure if we'd get a open, I suppose, runaway race, or if we've had a pack race. So when you kind of think of Moto 3 Misano, what the race was you kind of thinking that was going to happen before we had seen lights out?
Well, I guess going into it, I kind of thought it'd be one of those races where you get maybe like a top group of like 6 or 7 just sort of pulled away, because obviously Misano, a lot of especially the fast sections on the back end of the circuit, that's pretty flat out on a Moto 3 or, very high speed. So they actually do get slipstream through those turns, so that keeps them together. Also, lots of heavy braking at this circuit. I mean, even though it's quite difficult in the higher classes to overtake, bit easier in Moto 3. Plenty of chances for a dive bomb, and a Moto 3 rider loves a good dive bomb, so that allows them to scope up a little bit more. So I was expecting maybe like the top guys just to be able to pull away, and to be fair, as the race played out, that's pretty much what we ended up with. But of course, there was a bit of shenanigans on the way to actually get to that point, with leaders sort of pulling away and then being caught back up. But last 5 laps, that's the exact kind of race that we had.
Exactly. Now, unfortunately, in turn 1 and 2, we had a small little collision. It was David Mugnat who had a bit of a weird run through turn 1 and collided, unfortunately, with Rueda. That just immediately set the tone of, in the middle of the pack, there was just that break where, you have to kind of pick up, I have to roll the throttle, I need to change my line, and that just gives a bit of a gap straight away at the front. So we end up then from that resulting in a bit of an Ortola Holgado breakaway where they thought to themselves, we can push on. Now, Misano is a pretty decent circuit in terms of grip, so a lot of times when you have a high grip circuit, it's actually not a very abrasive circuit, and you can actually push a bit harder on it, versus last time out when we had a real kind of low grip and it was a lot of tyre issues throughout all classes. So I think they both thought if we can maybe just distance ourselves from the pack, we might be able to control the race and go along. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but Rhys, is that the way you saw it too, that the two of them look like if we can make a breakaway, we can maybe stay out of trouble?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the tactic, because of course initially it was actually Piqueras that was leading. He was pulling those two away a little bit, and then obviously he had to take his double long lap for his incident in qualifying. I'm sure we'll come on to him in a little bit. But then that obviously left Ortola and Holgado out, and to be honest, it was a bit of a surprise because they kind of just left Alonso in the dust. Like, Alonso looked pretty slow in the opening stages. I don't know whether maybe he was trying to look after his tyres a little bit more early on, because we have seen in the past, in fact, we saw last round that he overcooked his tyres by pushing too early, so maybe he was just trying to be a bit more cautious for that. Hadn't actually thought of that at the time, but that probably would make sense. Maybe that was his strategy. But like you say, there wasn't a massive tyre issue here. I mean, across the whole category, like all 3 categories, they were using a lot of soft tyres in the race with MotoGP, so that there were obviously some drop-offs at the end. I think Alex Marquez ran out of tyre at the end, for example, but overall it wasn't that big of an issue in terms of tyres. So Moto3 especially is going to be, not a problem. As we saw, it was a bit of almost a Dunlop style comeback that we've seen from Piqueras, because we've seen riders struggle to do that a little bit more this year. Obviously, we've seen people come from the back loads of times, Brad Binder, Pedro Acosta. I think even Alonso's done it a few times as well in the past, but this year it's been a bit more difficult with the Pirellis, but it did seem here like the tyre wear wasn't too big of a factor. So those two were going pretty hard early on to try and pull away. Obviously, they're probably going to work together to an extent to try and beat Alonso, because Alonso's got such a lead, they need to gain the points back on him. So there's no point those two just bashing each other out the way and sort of getting caught up in the pack. So I think they kind of decided, not like they colluded before the race or anything, but probably in that position, they're like, right, we're pulling away from the pack, no point battling, let's just keep going. And yeah, obviously that's how the initial laps opened up. As soon as Piqueras was out the way, they had a bit of a gap behind to Alonso, and then a few other riders as it was chopping and changing behind. Forasata coming through. Lunetta was there for a little bit till he got his penalty as well, and I think Adrian Fernandez was up there to some extent. So a bit of battling going on behind just allowed those guys to make that little bit of a break. What was it, maybe a second and a half, something like that? It was a substantial-ish lead, but was something that was obviously eventually whittled down, as maybe they had to look after their tyres a little bit as the race went on, because obviously it wasn't a massive issue, but you still can't go 100% the entire race.
Yeah, a lot of long lap penalties really spread the opening group, because I think you mentioned Eric Piqueras. Linetta had the slightest of jump starts, but unfortunately that was a penalty. Piqueras' teammate, Angel Fernandez, had one. So there was a couple of people just after making holes in the pack, and it just resulted in slightly maybe stepped races where we've groups half up the field and changing. But as you did mention, overall they slowly started to come back together, and when we started coming together, one man in particular seemed like he wanted all the headlines, and that was Tyre Forasata. Now, he's been pretty decent this year. He's been highlight rider on and off in past, but I think this year he's been quite consistently fast, and for Honda rider, a Japanese Honda rider even at that, it is great to see. We probably haven't talked about him that much this year on the podcast, but I must say I have to give him a shout out today. He was aggressive all race, and well, a lot of people were like, let's just try and get down to the last 3 or 4 laps. He was like, no, let's race now, and he was passing everyone, and he was seeming very aggressive and led an off for a bit. So what did you make of Forasata and his kind of overall trend of upward results over the last kind of 6-7 months?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned him a little bit at the back end of last year. Some of the flyaways, I think he started to show his face a little bit at the front. We're like, this kid seems pretty good. I mean, did he do the clean sweep of the Asia Talent Cup when he was in it? I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure he won every single race. I think it was a bit of a weird COVID-y season, so they went to perhaps some of the tracks a couple of times and stuff, but I'm pretty certain he won every race, which is pretty incredible. So we knew he was pretty good coming into it. Did he come in, was it part way through last year, or was it part way through the year before? I can't remember, but I seem to remember that he couldn't start initially because he was too young, and then had to come in later on. I could be completely off base with that, but that's my recollection. So he came in with a bit of pedigree anyway. I definitely heard things about him before he turned up, and then yeah, obviously towards the end of last year he was showing his face a little bit. Then, like you say, this year he's been there or thereabouts in quite a few races. I mean, there's weekends where he's definitely absent. He's not like a Colin Vire that's there week in, week out, that we're quite impressed by, or one of those other, like even Joel Kelso to an extent is most weeks now not really able to do a lot, but he's there with the leading group just about pretty much every weekend. Whereas you see Forasata, he has races like this where he's up there battling for the win, and then next weekend he's battling for like 15th or whatever. So has been a bit hit or miss, but like you say, over the last few races, definitely being a little bit more competitive, although I think maybe his competitiveness does depend on the Honda slightly. Did seem like a pretty good weekend for the Hondas, actually. Obviously, we had Piqueras obviously winning the race. I mean, the layup bikes go well most weekends, to be fair, anyway. But obviously, had Lunetta up there. Obviously, he was up there last weekend as well, but he was like a pretty quick weekend for Asata. I think there was another, I think it was Bertelli, or one of the Snipers bikes was up in the lead group at one point. So
Bertelli was in the top 8 for most of the race, but I do believe he crashed.
Yeah, I think he did crash, but he was there or thereabouts. So it did seem like a better weekend for the Honda, so I think that potentially helped out for Asato. But yeah, like you say, he was not messing around. He was pulling some aggressive passes, showing like he was, he belonged to be up there. And you do kind of feel for him being like on that bike, because obviously being a Japanese rider in the Honda Team Asia, that's where he's going to stay. But I'd like to see him maybe on a KTM or something next year, just to see what he could do, because clearly the KTM's a better bike, and especially for that kind of riding style where you're kind of sitting people up, dive bombing a little bit, I think it's a better point and squirt bike than the Honda, which is a bit more corner speedy, which, there is some sections of this track that quite play into that strength. So, yeah, I think overall it was a pretty good race for him. Where did he actually finish in the end? I can't remember exactly what position he finished in, because obviously of all the chaos that's going on in that last lap, and was he about 5th, maybe 4th or 5th, something like that? Wasn't on the podium, was he? But yeah, it was a good race for Asato, definitely. And yeah, I think we'll going into these flyaways. I think we'll probably see a bit more of him, because, like I said last year, that's when he sort of made his presence known.
So he finished 4th, and to be fair, that's kind of unfortunately he's like the first loser to be just off the podium. But he's been there, and he's getting slightly better. And you do mention there that the Honda is probably that small percentage of questionable about him that we just don't know. And I think most weeks you say, I'd like to see so-and-so on a KTM. And to be honest, I fully agree with you most weeks that you see a rider and go, he's doing well. I'd just like to see him on a KTM and not on the Honda, because they're just, again, everyone has that kind of question mark when they're on the Honda. It's like, oh, how actually good is he if he was on, we'll say, a competitive bike? I know the Honda has his weekends, but over a full season, it just doesn't compete like the KTMs do. So, yeah, but I am impressed with Forasato's season, to be fair. The number 72, he's after coming into the class, and when he's on it and when the bike is working for him, he seems good, and he seems to have something about him. And I think Tatsuki Suzuki's kind of faded away as the Japanese rider of the class. So I think now with Furusawa coming through, he'll be the next big man maybe to go into the Moto 2 team to maybe replace Chantra in time. And he could be another rider. He could be the rider who replaces Chantra in GP in a couple of seasons' time if the way it lines up. Because I would imagine Chantra going into GP will stay there for a few years. Very similar to Nakagami. They'll like to keep him there provided he's not overly making a show of himself. So I'd imagine Furusawa could be the next big Japanese rider coming through for that LCR seat if LCR is still a Honda. Obviously we have some big news later with Honda, not LCR though. We'll wait to get to that later. But I just felt as well later on in the race, especially the last 4 laps, everyone was over the limit. Every move was contact. Every move just felt a bit dangerous, and last lap for 4 laps it just felt really like everyone thought, I have to make this move. Did you kind of have the same opinion recently? The last few laps it just felt like every move on everyone was like, oh
yeah, it was pretty crazy, wasn't it, at the end? It was definitely one of those. It was even more than we've seen in the standard Moto3 race, really over the line. And I think it is just because it is difficult to pass on this track. I mean, obviously I was saying that it's harder in the higher categories earlier on, but it's not super easy in Moto3. It's easier, but it's not super easy. It's a tricky track. I mean, a lot of the passes are block passes just because the best place to pass are into the heavy braking zones. So you get that few flip-flops where you can try and stick it at the inside as well. I think Furusawa did do that at one point, didn't he? At the inside of Ortola and sort of nerfed him out the way. And then so we had Alonso getting beaten up on the last lap. And yeah, there were a lot of really, really aggressive moves. I don't think many... I think maybe there was a couple that went a bit over the line, but I think generally they just about kept it clean and it's aggressive and they're fighting for the win at the end of the day. And some of those riders, not winning races before, obviously like Piqueras and Furusawa up there, and they're obviously trying to bash people out the way to try and get their first wins and stuff like that. And obviously then you've got the guys that obviously wanted to try and beat David Alonso, so they're desperate to try and win the race as well. So bit of desperation, maybe sinking in there. Difficult place to pass. It just kind of breeds it all together. And with the slipstream down sort of the back straight, sort of like towards La Quercia, and obviously then the section that all tightens up towards Caro, there's 2 pretty good dive bomb opportunities there. Tremonto as well, right on the exit of Quercia. So if you've been passing to Quercia, you can go into Tremonto as well. And there's Rio, and there's lots of dive bomb corners. So yeah, it's kind of to be expected.
yeah. I think the only move for me that was a little bit over the limit was someone passing Alonso, and it was kind of like halfway through Tremonto, and they had like a couple of collisions with him, and was it Ortola? Yeah, and he basically was hanging off the edge of the bike, and I just felt like that was just over the limit because on another day that is Alonso out of the race. Like I felt it was just a bit much, but for the rest of them, I think they're all harsh but fair moves. They were kind of pretty much like the overtakes you have to put on a track like this, where you just can't make it clean. You have to kind of elbow them out of the way. And then it becomes, I had to go for the move. I have a pace advantage, but I can't really make it clean. I have to kind of ruffle them up some way to get them past. And I think it just, again, probably amplifies at this track. And I'm actually quite interested to see the race next time out, because we'll have to go through another free practice, 1-2, a whole day of qualifying, and then a race again. All that data, everyone is going to be highly strung and on the limit. It could be a different style of race where everyone seems over the limit, or we can have a race where it gets spread out because everyone is doing absolutely their pace, and it might change it up. But I suppose we just mentioned there Alonso, he did get bullied today. It's the first time in a long time I've thought Alonso didn't look particularly good in the fight. Now also I did notice at the start when Ortola and Holgado seemed to just make a little bit of a march on the rest of them, he didn't seem to have the pace even to go with them, even if he wanted to. Now it could be down to a bit of tire management or just a bit of race management. I just felt like at no point in the race did he look like, he's the key rider. There was a few laps in the mid part where he started taking time back out of them, but I felt like it was just kind of slipstreaming onto the back of them more than making jump between the different groups across. But I just felt just wasn't 100% on it. Ends up getting a drop 1 position penalty on the last lap. The penultimate right just after Carvone just kind of, he's being passed and he kind of just picks the bike up and just kind of runs it onto the green, just touches it, so it drops another position. So it definitely wasn't as great this weekend and did seem to get bullied just slightly.
Yeah, he did, didn't he, a little bit? I mean, I think, like you say, obviously I said it earlier on that at the start he seemed to just not have it for them, but he was then the one that reeled them back in, if I'm not mistaken. So he did have the pace to some extent, and he was on pole as well. So he did kind of have the pace, but it just seemed like, I think he was perhaps in the early stages overreacted to what he did last week, where he absolutely bolted and sort of ruined his tyres. I think he was trying not to do that again, so I think that cost him early on. And then towards the end, obviously he got beat up in the fight a little bit, but even if you are good in the fight, if someone's actually ramming into the side of you and about knocking you off, there's not a massive amount you can do. So, yeah, I mean, he did get beat up a little bit in a few places, but where was he? He was about... Was he second or third starting the last lap? So he positioned himself as he typically does, but yeah, like you say, he just came off on the wrong side of it, which it's Moto3, it's bound to happen eventually. Even the guys that are the best in the battle, I mean, if someone is that desperate to get past you, they will force a move, and there's not much you can do if someone's literally ramming you out the way, which did happen to him a couple of times in the last lap. Obviously there was that one, but he also had a bit of contact. But at the same time, he said it to other people. Like, remember Silverstone, Colin Vire, when he absolutely basically rode through Vire to try and fight for the win there. Like, people remember that, and people are going to be hard on Alonso because they know he's hard on other people, and also his championship rivals like Ortola, they're going to be hard on him because they need to beat him. Now, I do think, like I said, Ortola's move was a bit over the line because he did nearly knock him off. I'm surprised not more was said about that. I mean, I probably would have not a penalty, but I would have probably would expect maybe get a bit of a warning behind the scenes for that at the very least, because it was a bit over the limit, because you can't just ride into someone like that like twice as well. There's contact and then do it again, like feel like, oh, just hit him, or let me hit him again kind of thing. So not that you did it on purpose, but it's kind of one of those things where you've got to be a bit more aware of what's going on. But yeah, it happens sometimes. Alonso, obviously, he'll bounce back from that, I'm sure. It is strange to see, like you say, because usually he is the king of these fights, but I think in that situation, it's like once you get sort of hit by one person, then the next corner you get sort of picked up and hit by another one, that it is easy to lose your momentum and difficult to fight back. And yeah, I think perhaps maybe also he's got a bit of that mindset now where like he may as well take 5th place rather than try and battle them for the win, because he's got such a lead. It's better to just lose a couple points than to lose 25 to them. Not that obviously it's going to do massive damage to him if he does, but he's probably in that mode now where he's thinking about wrapping up the championship and maybe preparing for his Moto2 campaign. I know it's a little bit early to say that, but he's so far in front that that's probably going to be part of the mindset as well.
There's definitely something in the back of his mind that now he's moving up, that he has to win it this year. I think a lot of people kind of overlook that when they're moving out of the class and they're on the way for potentially a title. Same as Aldeguer. He knew he was moving up, so he kind of probably put too much pressure on himself to win. I think Alonso now is just thinking, take the points, make it easy, bring it home, job done, and he might win it as early as we were kind of talking in previous weekends, but you never know, he might just kind of roll it out the end of the year. But I just felt he just didn't have as much control on today's race as he normally does. Was someone who had a lot of control on the race, probably too much control. Angel Pierres, just what a stunning race from him, because with about 5 laps to go, he's still not even in the podium positions. It wasn't until about 2 laps ago I realised he had kind of caught him, because I know the commentary team are kind of bigging up, oh, Angel Pierres is coming back, he's close, he's faster than ever, and he's as fast as leaders. You're like, yeah, but he's nowhere. I can't even see him. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh shit, he's 4th. So he just came out of nowhere and just kind of like spawned in it. And it was an amazing ride, because again, he does a double long lap, which is, it's hard enough to kind of make it back on a single. He's also on a Honda.
It's a long one here as well, isn't it? It's not one of these short long laps. It's a really, really big long lap.
Yeah, it's also part of the old track, so the surface is a lot different. And again, we had a bit of rain and kind of just a bit of everything over the weekend. I think on Thursday there was a small bit of rain, so you just question how clean that long lap loop would be. So they throw it in, they go around. He does it the second time. He's down to like P19 and comes back and wins. It just shows again why he's another young Spanish up and coming that will be destined for GP in a couple of years. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about Piqueras. It was just an absolute stunner today from him.
Yeah, it was fantastic, wasn't it? It was one of those Pedro Acosta, Brad Binder style races that I was mentioning earlier on. It just coming back from that like really lowly position, fighting his way back through after the penalty. Obviously, he was sort of game planned straight away. Did he qualify 4th? He basically took the lead really early on in the race, led for the first lap or two. He actually got overtaken. Obviously, Rio took the lead. He obviously wanted to lead into that long lap penalty. Did that. Obviously, then did the other long lap penalty. And then we didn't see a lot of him. We saw him make the odd pass, but that was about it. But then he slowly ghosted his way up to what was about P6, and he was just behind Colin Vire, who was obviously the lead of the pursuers, really. But then I think those two sort of bolted away. And like you say, with about maybe 3 laps to go. They were still about a second and a half off the back. So you're kind of thinking, oh, they're just going to run out of time. And to be honest, he'd been sat about that distance behind for a while. It makes me wonder whether, because he pushed so much, he knew he needed to slow down the pace a little bit just to not shred his tyres, because it is obviously an issue with the Pirellis. I mean, I know I said again the tyre wear wasn't that high, but you push them the entire race, they will still go off. The Dunlops probably could have done it, but the Pirellis I don't think could. So perhaps maybe just for a few laps slowed the pace down, and then as the guys in front were battling, which that's when Forsato kind of at the same time was starting to throw his passes, and they were all passing each other. So it's costing them a lot of time. All of a sudden, those two are right on the back, and then with that momentum, he just comes through. He basically just picks them off one by one, gets his way to the front on that last lap. He did get briefly overtaken by a couple of them. I think Ortola went back at him through, not Curverni, it was the corner after Curverni, I think, and then he sort of jutted back up the inside. Again, Piqueras did. So, yeah, I mean, it was phenomenal racecraft. We've seen some really good races from him this year. I remember Austin particularly was quite a good one, wasn't it, I think? Last round, he lead very briefly, and then he made a bit of a mistake, and I think he was a bit over-exuberant there. I think he thought he could perhaps get his first win, and then again here starts performing. So he's kind of finding his stride now. A lot of rumours as well that he might be out of that team at the end of this year on his way to a KTM. Not the Red Bull KTM though, because he already bought his way out of that contract for some reason that he was supposed to have for this year. Not quite sure why he'd do that, but there you go. But yeah, for him, it was pretty much the perfect race. It's one of those races where you've got to be something a bit special to pull that one off, and yeah, really, really well deserved, and really clean race as well, because obviously he obviously got the penalty for not such a clean move in qualifying, or free practice not qualifying, but yeah, he didn't repeat that one. He didn't seem to think he deserved a penalty. I don't know what you think about that, but pretty sure you probably do for knocking.
Shock motorbike rider doesn't think he's done anything wrong, is what I think about.
Goes for pass at fastest corner on calendar, completely clatters other rider out the way. If you've gone and said sorry to somebody afterwards, which apparently he did, surely you think you probably deserve a penalty for it, but there you go. But maybe that's the one mistake he made all weekend, was thinking he didn't deserve a penalty.
So the Moto2 title is one I'm actually quite keen on seeing how it plays out. Maybe because Iagoro is back in it and up at the front. Also, I just think there's so many kind of pawns in this championship. There's going to be a lot of drama between now and the last laps in the Col de Valencia. But this weekend, again, we saw a walking wounded Garcia also crash again in Friday's practice. Another horrible crash. He kind of gets himself back to his feet and then walks a few steps and then realises he's in too much pain and then basically collapses to his knee again. Horrible scenes. Ends up qualifying P8. Rhys, the kind of writing was on the walls for this weekend already with Garcia after his Friday and Saturday performances.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he was definitely better this weekend than last weekend, that's for sure, because he was actually looking quite good until he crashed on Friday. Like, it wasn't amazing, but it was definitely much more on the pace. So clearly he'd recovered from whatever injury, picked up the sort of the whatever before Aragon, the week before that, whatever he'd done to himself, seemed to recover from that, and obviously then the crash he had in Aragon qualifying as well, he'd sort of come back from that a little bit. But yeah, it was a nasty crash on Friday morning, sort of going into the second corner, like there's the flip-flops to the right and the left, into the left. Not sure exactly what happened. I don't know whether he didn't engage the gear properly or whatever, but he got flung over the top. Heavy crash, like you said, got up and then had to get straight back on his knees. So yeah, it looked like another poor weekend from him. So again, qualifying basically same position, but to be fair, he did a pretty good damage limitation in this one. Did he manage to scrape about 4 points, 12th place? And then you could see after the race how much it took out of him. So yeah, it was one of those weekends where he was definitely on the back foot once again, but certainly it was more like Iagoro's ride in Aragon than his ride in Aragon. He definitely did a lot better. He seemed to be a lot better, but that crash probably did set him back a little bit more. I think he probably could have had a top 10 maybe if he didn't have that, because just probably seemed to injure him again, put him on the back foot on his Friday. But I'll have to see coming here again in a couple of weeks' time, see how he performs, because another couple of weeks to heal, track that obviously he'll have a bit of data at, and yeah, we'll have to see if he can finally bounce back. But yeah, it just continues that pretty nightmarish run ever since Austria, really, for him, where he's scored very, very few points.
Yeah, it was interesting going into the race, because I just had a feeling would we kind of see him right around us at the back doing very little? Because again, he's had a big crash. The last thing he needs is another crash. He was definitely in pain. And in fairness though, he came out fighting. He really was up against it and got a brilliant result to kind of get back. And you could see him in the pits afterwards. He was emotionally just absolutely wiped out. He was distraught, whether it was the pain, just the whole pressure he's under at the moment, just everything kind of coming to a kind of close, kind of just like a massive release at the end of the race. But it is quite well known that a lot of ex-riders say when you're racing and you're in the heat of battle, you don't really notice the pain. It's as soon as you cross the line and you kind of sit up and it's just everything hits you all at once. So that it could be just that emotional kind of fallout of putting in a 40-minute kind of absolute kind of Olympic level, or emptying your gas tank for that race and just giving it everything, and then you just cross the line and it all kind of, you pay back everything you just spent on yourself in the previous race. Kind of just everything was just left out there, and he was very, very, very emotional in the pits. And it's probably everything from everyone putting the pressure on. Igor is injured, he should pick up big points, and then he's kind of just misfired, had a couple of nasty crashes, has the injury outside of the racing as well. So I feel like poor Garcia at the moment should be just wrapped up in bubble wrap and just be transported back to the hotel and left till next Mazzano again, because I just feel at the moment he cannot do anything wrong, or anything right, shall I say. Everything he touches is wrong at the moment. But finally today, in today's race, I just feel like he just turned the corner and kind of pulled out performance that proves why he is leading the championship and was leading the championship until today. But it just showed his skill in his class today. But I just feel it might be still a step too far for him to keep going against Iagora. I just think Iagora has a bit more than him in terms of experience, and probably Iagora for me is a more complete rider. And yeah, just Garcia just needs to kind of have a bit of a reset over the next 2 weeks. He needs to come back fit for the second Mazzano. That is imperative. He comes back fit and healthy, and he can kind of just go and focus on his racing, because every weekend you're just thinking, oh, he's going to be feeling worse for wear after that crash. He just does not need another crash again after what he experienced today. But I did mention there quickly, Iagora, he is definitely back on form today. He was interviewed before the race today and said, podium is my goal. Don't think I have the speed for the win. And well, he goes and wins it. It's kind of an Iagora thing where he feels like he doubts himself a bit more. He is now taking the lead in the championship, I believe, off of memory, 7 points he has over his teammate. A lot of other people have kind of stuttered this weekend. We'll cover in a minute, but Iagora back on form race. It just looks like now he can probably go to the Asian rounds and maybe put a march on this remainder of the title.
Yeah, he's put that injury behind him now, hasn't he? And he's sort of back on that form, because coming into Austria, until he crashed in that free practice session, he was on form. He was just before the summer break, he was really coming on song, gaining some points back on Garcia for the first time, because pretty much up to that point, Garcia had been stretching out the lead to him. There was obviously Catalunya, where obviously it was kind of reversed, but they'd already had the 1-2 at Le Mans and stuff like that. So really, they weren't that far apart, but obviously Garcia had been stretching the lead slowly up until that point. But pretty much ever since then, Agora's been on the run of sort of gaining those points back, and obviously he was on pole at Silverstone. Race didn't quite go to plan. I think he had a dodgy tyre or something, because there's no way he's gone from pole to 14th. If he's on pole, it must have been really quick that weekend. It's Iagora, he's not a qualifier. Although he has improved that massively the last few rounds, which I think is a big reason why it's sort of helping him out so much in the championship. It's like when he's actually on form, he's qualifying really well as well. But I think he was on a really good run of form. Looked like he was going to pretty easily win that Austrian GP. Obviously picked up the injury there, so he obviously missed that race completely. We both agreed that he did a really good damage limitation at Aragon to just gain a few points in the top 10, which obviously is fantastic considering the injury, like the pain he must have been in, and obviously probably not quite as much pain as Garcia it seemed, and probably as much pain as Garcia was in this weekend as well. But to still do that with only about a week after you broke your hand or whatever, so he was doing a really, really good job there. Then it finally seems he's probably back to relatively full fitness now, and he's picked up that form where he left off in Austria, really. Again, qualifies to the front, wins the race. I mean, earlier on in the season, you could kind of say, well, he's a good rider on what is the best bike at the moment, the Bosca Seguro, but it does seem like the Kalex maybe is a little bit better now, but it's very, very close at the very least, and Agora he's finally back into that 2022 form, because obviously last year he was pretty hit and miss. Obviously he had the injuries and he didn't really bounce back, but yeah, he seems to be back to his best now. Like you say, going into these flyaways, I think he's definitely the favourite now, because he's got the momentum behind him. he's got the lead over everybody else. The lead to Garcia is not that big, but the lead back to Lopez is pretty big. The lead back to Joe Roberts is pretty big. The lead back to Jake Dixon is pretty big. And I know it's only like 40 odd points, but still that's pretty large. That's a retirement at least for him. I don't think they're going to outscore him by that many if he doesn't crash or whatever, have some misfortune. So yeah, he's in the driver's seat now, and it is about whether Garcia can respond. But I think at this point, I think Agora has surpassed him in terms of pace. So yeah, I think it's just, will Agora go for the dive bomb at Malaysia? That's purely what this championship's going to come down to now.
Bloody Malaysia. Yeah, couldn't agree more. I just think it's in Agora's hands. But we've seen it. I think every week on this podcast was like, he's out of it, he's winning. This is going to happen, this is going to happen. But we need to remember, we've seen with Toprak's injury this week in Superbikes, any moment on any race track, anything can happen. So we're probably quick to, he's out of it. There's no way this guy can win this race. There's no chance he'll win at this track. Anything at any race track can happen. It really is a lottery when it comes to live sport. And of course, motorsport as well is a whole different kettle of fish. But Igor today, I was kind of, when the race started, after his interview on the grid, just thinking to myself, is there a bit of doubt still? Is the hand still not right? Because I've never seen him outright say, I don't have the pace for the win. But then I was thinking, is it a kind of double bluff? But at that point in the race, who is he trying to bluff? So I was kind of a bit perplexed, but in the end, he showed why he's kind of the Sunday man of the class. He always turns up on a Sunday. And you are 100% correct as well this year, especially last probably 5-6 rounds. His qualifying has improved immensely, so it means he doesn't have to put in a mammoth of a shift on a Sunday to get to the podium. He's already starting next to the podium, on the podium positions, which for a rider of his caliber, he can just immediately set his pace. It's the one thing we talk about in Bastianini. If Bastianini could qualify front row, imagine how many races he could win just for his late race pace in the last third of his race. So Igoro is showing what can be done when a rider of that kind of caliber that can save the tyre can qualify. You end up winning a lot of races, and you're, in my eyes, a favourite now for the championship. But you did mention there's a big gap. Lopez crashed on the first lap. Vietti crashed on 3 or 4 laps ago. Roberts went backwards. Championship over for them three, Rhys, really, at this point. I know we're kind of probably bigging it up more than it is, but it was pretty much always over. But at this point now, no score from any of them 3 riders. Surely it's down to now the 2 empty helmets and Dixon.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in theory, Lopez and Robertson are tied in points, and they are both ahead of Dixon still. So I suppose if we're saying that Dixon can still do it, technically those guys can. But I agree in terms of the form. Obviously, we don't want to spend too much time on it because the guy that qualified 14th isn't particularly worth mentioning too much. But just to kind of contrast it, Dixon started 14th and finished 5th today, which 5th is by no means amazing championship winning result when you're that far behind. But he didn't crash when he probably could have done, trying to push too hard for the podium or trying to find his way through or getting knocked off further down the pack. Whereas, like you say, Lopez crashed, Vietti crashed. Roberts may as well have crashed. I don't know what happened to him. He wasn't too far back. He was around. Well, him and Dixon were pretty much together at the start of the race, and that kind of their 2 races completely divulged. Really, a bit like how the seasons have as of late. I mean, Dixon fought his way all the way up to 5th. Did Roberts actually just finish about 15th? He was battling. I know he was battling Garcia for 15th at one point, which again is crazy. Like when you see at the start of the race where Roberts is, then you see all of a sudden later on in the race he's now battling Garcia. Garcia was 28th at the start of the race. Roberts was about 9th in the early few laps, and they've managed to actually come together on track, and Garcia's gapped him. It's Joe Roberts has got to be a case study here. His championship has really dropped off. I mean, Garcia, he's been injured. That's why he's sort of dropped off the board. Agora got injured. Roberts did get injured, but it was before the summer, and he's come back and had decent results since then. But he's just completely dropped. I think Roberts' issue right now is mental, definitely, because it's all about missing out on that GP ride, because he's just been pretty poor since that happened. Really, the only race he was doing anything decent, I think, was Silverstone, and he crashed there. See, Aragon, he wasn't doing too bad till he knocked Vietti out of the way, got a long lap, then crashed trying to beat his teammate, and yeah. So those guys there, I mean, obviously Vietti was was miles off anyway. He was even further back than Dixon and did not have the form that Dixon had. So I don't think he was really in a shout, but mathematically he was. But crashing out of what looked like probably a podium or maybe even a win, because he was coming towards him at the end. And we know Vietti is another one of those guys that usually has a late race pace, and in these weird flyaway rounds, another rider that particularly goes quite well in them, but put himself out there. Lopez crashed on the first lap. It's the most Lopez thing to do. Be desperate to pass Albert Arenas and then just crash. Try and do that. Albert Arenas, where did he finish? Probably like about the same place as Joe Roberts by the end. Like, it wasn't worth throwing away all those points just trying to beat him on the first lap. You know, you could pass him a bit later on, but yeah, it's I don't know if I can say it's over completely, because this season has just been so random and all over the place, but in terms of the momentum, it's not on their side. I think the momentum riders in the championship, I think, still are Agora and Dixon, as we were saying previously, really. So I think it's Agora's to lose at this point, because he's got such a lead. I think that's his biggest threat. Probably is now probably Dixon, and he's pretty far behind still. So yeah, I think those two could very well finish 1-2 in the championship, or maybe 1-3 if Garcia picks up. But yeah, I think for Lopez and Roberts, I actually don't know the exact points. I think they're tied. Dixon must be a few more behind. I don't think he will be after next round. I think he'll probably be ahead of both of them. And yeah, those two are just going to slowly fall the same way as Aldeguer has, just kind of drop out of contention.
So Dixon in 5th in championship is 3 points behind Lopez and Roberts, and you are correct. They are on 133 points respectively. They are 33 points behind Garcia, and the Garcia to Agora gap is 9 points. So
how much does he have actually?
Pick about maths.
Agora.
175 points. 175.
It's pretty poor at this point in the season.
It is, but it just shows though at the start of the year he was misfiring. Garcia has been misfiring the last few rounds. Joe Roberts has misfiring the last few rounds. Alonso Lopez, we both hand on hand said that we didn't think he'd be that close. He's just having another season where he's kind of ticking along, taking his 5th place here and there. Dixon might well not have started the season till Jerez.
But he didn't.
Ramin is on 122 points in 6th. Again, he's another rider that every week we're talking about why did he crash doing this.
Hey, he didn't crash this week.
For me.
So, you know, he didn't
he didn't, but where did he finish?
I don't know.
Finished bloody not on his... Funnily enough,
was he 6th?
He was 6th. Yeah, he's 6th in championship and was 6th in the race. Manuel Gonzalez is a rider I'm slightly disappointed with his season, considering he is Mr. Ultra Consistency, and he's crashed a couple of times more than I thought he would this year, and I thought again to jump to the bigger team and the better.
It's decent.
Yeah, but it just does not enough for them. The fact he's 115 points, he's only 4 points ahead of Kennett, and we probably both could admit that Kennett's not been having an amazing season, which probably puts into context why everyone seems a bit like they've had patches this year where they've been good, but nobody's been good since Qatar, really. It's just one of those ones where I suppose everyone's had their mistakes, and now we're probably going to try and get to the end of the year with having your least mistakes, and that's what will win it. But I do completely agree. For me, it's between the MTE helmet boys, unless outside forces to get involved. I don't see how Dixon can close that gap.
No.
I don't expect him to be very quick in 2 weeks' time again here in Misano. And again, we talk about what could happen in these flyway races, but the one man that I would trust a bit more in the flyway races is the Japanese of Ayagora. I think you're going to that his part of the world where the conditions will suit more what he has known in his career. So I think he is a bit of an advantage going there. So once he's left alone on the last few laps of Sepang, I think really it's his title to lose.
Arbolino's back on form. You never know, it could happen again.
Unlikely. So in the Premier class, it is always known that the VR46 Academy spend a lot of their training hours at the Misano World Circuit, and well, it was no surprise when we got our first ever VR46 Academy front row lockout with Bezzecchi and Pecco on pole, and splitting the difference was Frankie Morbidelli. So again, 3 Ducatis on the front, 3 of Rossi's little minions, and yeah, Rhys, it was a pretty cool stat, and it just shows that track knowledge is key.
I'm actually surprised that is the first time. I would have thought they'd have done it before, to be honest, because, well, there's so many of them, for one. But, yeah, that's... Actually, interesting. I guess Marini being out the picture now does make that less likely, because obviously Di Giannantonio isn't really in the VR46 Academy, so if he was on the front row, would you count that? I don't know, but yeah.
I would. I think Academy riders is Zecchi, Francesco Bagnaia and Morbidelli at the moment, and Marini.
Yeah.
If you would class him still, even though he's kind of drifted away from the academy from what we can tell, but you don't really know. In one or two, then you have
Vietti, I suppose,
would be the
because he's at the back and they're all towards the front. But, yeah. Poor old.
But yeah, it was just a cool kind of stat when you see just three of Rossi's lads. Rossi being there himself, it was nice to see it. Didn't do much good for Bezzecchi in either race. I think after a lap in both races, he was ninth. So, yeah, I don't really know. He chose a weird tire I think he took a gamble on the sprint with the tire, or maybe it was the main race or something. But he had a good Sunday. Unfortunately, his sprint ended in the gravel along with his teammate Digia. But in the sprint, the main advantage went to Jorge Martin, who got one of the best starts he's ever got in his career. Went from fourth front of the second row to P1, and that was the sprint done. Pretty much, they should have probably just reeled him back in there, let him go to the podium ceremony, because there was very little else happening. Pecco just didn't seem to have it. He couldn't get near him. He couldn't make an overtake. We have seen all weekend long that Misano is one of them tracks that is not easy to overtake and requires a bit of a pace advantage, and when you're battling someone on equal equipment who is just as fast as you, it just shows it's just almost impossible, as Pecco found out.
I think the tyre pressures played a big part in that one, to be honest, because I think he expected to lead and he didn't, and that's, we've seen that happen before. You put low pressure in, or you put high pressure in, because you're going to not have anyone in front of you, so you don't have much heat going over the tyre, so you need to obviously put the pressure up, and then when you're behind someone, pressure goes too high, so you got to drop back, which I think he did towards the end. I also do think, though, there was a slight mental edge to it, because I think he came into this weekend expecting to basically win, like do the double and pull quite a decent haul on Martin, especially when he saw his mates probably on the front row with him, and they were looking pretty quick this weekend. But it just didn't, well, as obviously it panned out pretty well for him in the main race, I guess, but obviously, as we saw, it didn't really go that way, and you could tell on the podium he just was really not happy. He was really, really not happy at all, and I think it was just a big blow for him. I think that obviously coming off the back of last week, where he obviously lost all those points by the collision with Alex Marquez, he thought he could come back here, gain a decent amount, and then he actually gets beaten by Martin in the sprint, and he's just thinking, oh no, this is not good, because it's the first time Martin's won for a while as well, really. First time he won since the Sachsenring sprint, I think. So it's been a good while for Martin.
Yep.
It looked like he had the... he looked comfortable in that sprint race. It was really, really incredible, because Bagnaia looked so fast all weekend, but Martin, every time... Well, he really does surprise us, as he did in the race as well, but he surprises us in different ways, does Martin, and yeah, it was a fantastic sprint from him. Bagnaia just didn't seem to have it, and I think the tyre pressures definitely played a part, but I also think there was the mental side, that he was probably just completely caught off guard by the fact that Martin was also in front of him, and probably took a little bit of time to regroup. And in a sprint, you don't really have much time to try and regroup. It's just, you got to go from the start.
Yeah, Jorge, after the sprint base, he said every lap was a qualifying lap. I think it shows it, because there's just at the moment, I feel, if there's nobody out of position in qualifying, I think the sprints can be a bit dull, because people just do qualifying lap after qualifying lap, and it just turns into a procession of who's most consistent, who could do the fastest pace possible for half a race distance. I know that's kind of what every race is, but there's more
it's almost like it's a sprint.
Tactical.
Well, they go flat out.
Almost like a sprint, exactly.
At
I
least
do wonder why
Marquez
they're
can't
named that when
qualify.
it's...
Makes it interesting.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He keeps like P6 to P2 kind of interesting for us, so we have something to watch. But Jorge Martin is just a specialist at doing qualifying lap after qualifying lap, and he does really have an advantage in these sprints. And of course, when he led into turn one, immediately you thought, oof, Pecco's dropped the ball there. He's not going to have a good chance to come back at him. And as you said, the tyre pressure as well did not help him being stuck behind on the bike, when he definitely thought he'd have nice cold fresh air on his front wheel. Definitely played a part in the fact he couldn't get too close, and he couldn't get close enough or long enough to make an overtake. So yeah, he was pretty pissed really after the sprint, Pecco was, that just he couldn't really lay glove on Martin. And yeah, and coming into Sunday as well, we kind of knew we might have a chance of mixed weather, so I think Peck was hoping he could get one over Martin on Saturday, just to have the bit of form over him, and would just put an extra bit of maybe doubt in Martin's mind coming into the main race. But unfortunately, that didn't go his way. But we did get the mixed weather we thought we would, and there's a few weird stories coming out of this one. I read an article before the podcast that Enev Ashley says, when it rains at Misano, there's a certain smell. And he said, on the grid, he didn't get that smell, so he knew it wasn't going to rain for long. So that's not in the podcast notes, Rhys, but what do you make of that?
I get what he means. I get what he means, though. You know, like when it's about to rain, you can smell that it's about to rain. It is strange. Like, I get what he means. Like, when it's in the air, I don't know if it's perhaps it's just some chemical that comes off the clouds that sort of just blows through first. I don't know, but sometimes you can get a bit of a smell. You're like, it's going to rain in a minute. I do see what he means. There must be some reason for it, because I definitely experienced that before. So I don't know whether you were perhaps expecting me to sort of scoff at that, but from, I suppose both of us from countries that rain a lot, so we should be pretty used to it, I guess. But yeah, I think it is interesting though that it says specifically at Mazzano it smells like a different way when it's about to rain. It does seem a little bit strange. I do know I kind of get it a little bit, but yeah, certainly an interesting comment. But he was clearly wrong, because it did rain, so not for very long, but it did. So obviously he needs to probably get a dog on the grid or something to sniff the air or whatever, tell him a bit more about whether it's going to rain, because clearly he wasn't predicting it too well today.
I don't have the sensors in me to predict rain with my nose, so that's still for me a weird one. I wasn't born with that feature, but I suppose you can kind of tell, you can feel in the air, but I'd never say smell that's going to rain. You kind of know, you could often be walking home from something, you're like, it's going to rain now, you just know it's going to rain, I'm going to get caught in the rain here. But like, I never go, I just rain on the way. I wouldn't have a good inhale and be like,
oh yes,
yeah,
raining.
Exactly.
So it's like
I wouldn't get up first.
Right before it rains, like you just kind of like get a bit of a smell. I don't know if it probably, I don't know, some sort of thing in the clouds, I guess. But
yeah, but I don't know. Next time I'm out in the open and I sense a bit of rain, I'll take some deep breaths and I'll make some comparisons. But yeah, bit of I just found it a bit of a strange one that he knows what Mazzano smells like when it rains.
Yeah.
And
it's not like he's a Rossi guy, so he's not there that often.
Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately, it did rain in the sprint. Now, the KTM supercomputer predicted the rain forecast absolutely perfectly, according to Augusto Fernandez. He said exactly what happened is what our computers are telling us. So, begs the question why Pedro Acosta pitted, but he was not the most unfortunate to pit. That would be, of course, Jorge Martin, who panicked, really, I suppose, is the only thing I can say. In championship run-ins, no matter what the conditions are, no matter what your gut instinct is, you match what your main championship rival. Reece, can you argue at any point why he shouldn't just match Pecco in this sort of situation?
No, you can't really, because like
you win together or you lose together, but at least you're consistent with your
exactly. Especially when he already has a big lead. So like, if they both score 0, that's pretty good for him. Like, I don't know. It just seemed it seemed like the right idea to follow him. I mean, even Marc Marquez said in the press conference, like jokingly, sort of said, I just followed the local guys. So he saw all the Italians stayed out, so he just stayed out as well, which, yeah, it's probably the thing to do. It's like, who's going to know like what the rain is like at this circuit more than anyone else? The guy you're following. Why? Like, I get why he probably pitted, because he obviously felt there was too much rain. He'd just got off the track and thought, whoa, and just dived in quickly. But yeah, I mean, you could tell immediately as he came in, he looked over, saw nobody else came in, thought, I've made a mistake here. And yeah, was certainly an interesting one. I mean, the KTM supercomputer, I mean, I guess Acosta probably pitted because he'd already crashed, so it was probably worth a risk. True. That was why. I mean, and also he had damage on his bike, so he probably wanted to swap to a bike that wasn't missing a wing, so that probably would have been maybe a bit more stable for him. So I guess that's why he pitted. But yeah, Martin, I guess, just overreacted to that. It was really strange because literally nobody else out of the lead positions pitted. Everybody else was just people that were struggling and took a bit of a gamble. It's like Acosta. Both the Aprilias did it, didn't they? In fact, Ralph Fernandez did all the Aprilias do it, actually, because the factory Aprilias did. All
the Aprilias, and I believe Augusto tried to pit and crashed.
Yes.
I don't know if he rejoined or not, because it said he was in the pits, but then also nearly the exact same time we got the icon that he had crashed. So not sure exactly what went on there, but yeah.
apparently, actually, there was a crash in the pit lane this weekend. I meant to mention it earlier, but apparently there was a crash with one of the forward bikes.
Yeah.
Someone stepped off the pit wall in front of... Oh, who was it? It was one of the wild cards, wasn't it? One of the wild cards on the forward, and his bike ended up going into the Aprilia garage, apparently, so that could have been...
There's actually a picture of the Aprilia on its stand and a bike on its side next to it. It's pretty scary. How far it made in. I think it's properly like wedged in next to the Aprilia. It's a bit of a frightening picture, to be brutally honest.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen that. I'll have to have a look at that after the podcast. But yeah, just made me think, as we were talking about someone crashing into the pit lane, that happened, which could have been a scary moment. Fortunately, there wasn't really anybody in the pits because the session, that pit box, because there wasn't a MotoGP session on at the time. So that was obviously quite fortunate. But yeah, so again, Augusto was on about the KTM supercomputer, but then tried to pit apart. I don't know. It seems a little bit strange to me, but yeah, obviously it did seem to rain pretty heavily on that lap because, I mean, Martin was all at the back of Bagnaia all of a sudden, and then everyone was scoping up. It was like that Austria race, the 2021 one, where all of a sudden that whole lead group just scopes up because everyone's just crawling round and trying to be careful. The guys coming from behind just keep trying to catch up, and then once they're able to get together, they're all kind of like, oh, let's stick at this pace and see who hits the rain first and stuff. But yeah, definitely seemed, well, it clearly was a mistake for Martin because he then came back in like 3 or 4 laps later. So yeah, I don't know why he took that gamble, really being... I mean, I get it to an extent because he obviously thought the conditions were too bad, but like you say, just follow your championship rival, because if you're both in the wrong conditions, you're both in the wrong conditions, but at least it's even, you're not going to lose points. And yeah, it's I also get that, yeah, taking the gamble's probably worth it, but I think I did see something where he said he focused too much on trying to win the race than actually thinking about the championship, so not great considering that's probably one of the things he suffered from in the past. But I think maybe to him, doing the double here was probably more of a psychological thing, maybe just to get a bit of something over Pecco. So I think maybe he was a bit desperate to try and just beat him any way he could, and he perhaps thought he couldn't do that in a straight fight because of how strong he was. But yeah, he basically is just throwing away what was a really comfortable championship lead once again. I mean, I'm pretty sure he did the same thing like Jerez, didn't he? So yeah, every time he gets like a 20-odd championship point lead, he just bins it, or just in this case pits for no reason.
Yeah, I wonder, does he feel like last year he maybe had too much of the eyes on the prize in terms of championship, and that a lot of his race decisions were championship based, and he felt like maybe he didn't try to win enough to get the championship across the line, if that makes sense. So I wonder, is this year he thinking, I have to focus, I have to take a one race time and try and do my best in each race, and maybe sacrifice the championship in certain points, and maybe at this point he thinks he has to approach the championship that way. He hasn't said as much, but just the fact that if he said he was at this point in the year, if you're in the title hunt, you might admit it, but you'll always prioritise your championship. So if he said he's prioritising the race win, that just seems a bit...
He hasn't won for a while, so maybe it was something to do with that, actually. But
yeah, true. But I just feel like it's a bit kind of maybe shallow thinking if he's just like, I need to win the race in such conditions, because realistically they come out of Rio was the first point I noticed it, where the overhead camera, I was like, they're going quite slow. I was like, is this me, or is it, they just look like they're tiptoeing around? And then we get to Quercia and Pecco leg down. Pecco's not one of the more kind of Dr. Dangle riders. He doesn't seem to do it as much as other riders, and he's like properly down on the ground, doesn't seem to want to tip the bike in. Martin exactly the same, and then you could see that just that sector from Quercia all the way around to probably Misano corner, which is the final corner, just seemed pretty wet. And then within a lap and a half, it seemed like they were back to reasonable speed again. They were about 2 seconds off what they were doing, so they were just taking a bit of caution with some curbs and white lines, but they were still going at a fair speed. And of course, then that's where Marc Marquez risks all really for the race win. Some argue he's still in the championship, some would argue not. Judging by the race, I still don't think he thinks he can win the championship outright. I think he just thinks get the best results at all times. And today, we talked probably last week so much about how it was the ideal Marquez kind of proposition of weird weather, really, really thin racing line, poor track conditions, bikes moving around. It was just, and at a racetrack that's counterclockwise, it was perfect for Mark. This was probably the other way he could have won, where we have a bit of weather, a bit of maybe a flight to flag, or just something, again, just a bit of a leveler where Mark can show his skill. And again, I think he probably doesn't win this race if it's a normal dry race. Even if he qualifies well, I just don't think he could probably get ahead of the GP24s if they're there on merit. But again, when there's a bit of weather or something goes awry, Marquez just picks up the piece and shows why he is one of the all-time greats. And I feel like Pecco just had to settle for P2. I think he said in his interview after it to battle Marc Marquez, you need to be at 100%, and obviously with his injury he wasn't. And one thing I noticed, especially after the sprint, is that he had to wait for a lot of his team to come and hold the bike for him to get off. He seemed pretty in a bad condition physically, which I don't know if he's kind of playing that down slightly for the championship's sake, but a lot of time, especially after the main race, when he gets off the bike, he seems very stiff. He gets off at his own fan club's grandstand and tries to walk over, and he looks very, very immobile in his walking and stuff. So I think, but again, another perfect zone for Mark in this sense. But as soon as it started raining, there was 3 men race, wasn't there, that we probably all thought would suit these conditions: Jack, Brad, and of course the winner Marquez.
Yeah, that's pretty much as it panned out, to be fair. I mean, Mark looked actually quite quick all weekend. It just seemed like he's made a small mistake in qualifying and that put him on the back foot, but he did seem, to be fair, since Austria seems to have taken a bit of a step, he does seem a little bit closer to Bagnaia and Martin, even in a normal condition, like, because obviously there's quite a bit of a disadvantage with the bike at the moment. You can see that the GP24 is a lot better, but it did seem to be maybe finally starting to get clear of the rest of the pack and just sort of being behind them, because obviously usually you get those two quite far out in front. And I think he's probably early season he kind of had like Bastianini covered, but then in the mid-season Bastianini started beating him a lot, but I think he's got back to that point where he's probably quicker than Bastianini in terms of raw pace again now. And I think he could have finished third if the weekend had gone normal. Obviously from the qualifying position I don't think that's how it would have gone, but I think he could have finished behind them in a normal dry race if he'd started in the right spot. So for next week, that's potentially what could happen. And yeah, obviously it was a bit of a perfect storm for him. But again, it was very reminiscent of Sachsenring 21. Like, it rained for a couple of laps, but then kind of dried up again and went back to normal. And once he was in the lead, he then set fastest lap and stuff like that. So his pace was good anyway, even though obviously, like you say, obviously Bagnaia didn't want to risk chucking away 20 points because he saw Martin with a lap down. He saw him come back out the pits the second time right in front of him. So it was the right thing to do, just to try and take that position. Like you say, he was probably a bit injured as well, and yeah, I think you had to wait for the sprint because I don't think anybody was there to take his bike, and obviously you need someone to put the paddock stand on. So I think maybe that's why. But yeah, in the main race, he certainly looked pretty stiff after getting off the bike, and Walko's fan club looked a bit awkward for him. He didn't really make much of an effort to go all the way over either. He went a bit into the gravel and did a bit of a wave and then walked off. So clearly was a bit in some sort of pain, some sort of discomfort, unfortunately. But yeah, it was one of those perfect little storms there for Marquez just to take advantage. It kind of gave him that advantage back that he sort of lost by starting so far down. It gave him a chance to catch up, make the positions, put a bit of a gap. And I think most weekends, if you gave him like a couple of seconds gap in front of the GP24s, he could probably just about keep it there. They'd probably catch him a bit, but he probably could just about beat them. So bit like back in the day we used to say about the Yamaha, if you let the Yamaha have like a lap on its own to build a bit of a gap, and then it could probably run that for the rest of the race and pull away. It's almost a bit like that now with Marquez. It's a bit of a disadvantage, but I think if he's in clean air, he can stick with them a bit more, but it's hard for him to pass them, and it's hard for him to pass with the other bikes as well, because he's battling up there with the KTMs, and the commentators keep saying stuff about, the Ducati gets off the corner better than the KTM, but the GP23 doesn't seem to get off the corner better than the KTM. When you watch on board, it seems like the KTM gets the jump, so it does seem like the GP23 is struggling to pass the KTM a little bit, whereas the GP24 can blitz it because it gets off the corner a lot better. So I think it's, when he has a race like this, it's difficult to come back through, so the rain played out for him perfectly, allowed him to fight his way through, and who would have thought a back-to-back? I wasn't expecting back-to-back wins when he hadn't won at all yet. It's I think it's a bit of a stretch to say the championship's still on, but we are coming into the flyaways, and it's, as we've seen, Bagnaia and Martin do some nice focus on each other, perhaps a little bit too much, and make silly mistakes. And if there's more races like this when Mark picks up 25 points, I mean, he could at least be like close enough to they have to look at him again. I don't know if he's actually I don't think he's going to actually surpass them, but once you start getting within 30 points again, you have to start having a look over your shoulder at him again a little bit, and yeah, would be interesting. But just to briefly touch on the KTMs that you mentioned, yeah, it did seem like they were going to go pretty well when the rains came down, but they didn't really. I don't think they closed up, but then
didn't really rain long enough. I don't think. I think after a couple laps was back to normal race. Really,
they didn't really. Miller made more of an advantage of it, but then did the Miller thing of dropping back, whereas Binder kind of stayed where he was pretty much. I don't know if he did gain a place or two, but then he held on. Pretty good result actually from him. Was he fourth? So yeah, it was pretty decent from Miller in the end. Not Miller, Binder in the end. Sorry, but Miller did the usual dropping back and was at the end battling with the Yamaha. So yeah, kind of shows the way his race went.
Yeah, and I suppose you do mention the Yamaha. I'd say it's probably worth giving Fabio Quartararo a shout out. He was good on Friday, managed to get himself into Q2 directly thanks to his Friday practice, and again just shows if he can kind of get into the Q2 directly, he can kind of blag himself a decent weekend out of it. I think in the sprint,
completely, doesn't it? It's crazy because he was actually
it really does because
he was with the KTMs the entire weekend. Like he was actually battling them all weekend, like in the races, both of them.
It just really shows that, like, because at minimum you make it through to Q2, you're starting 12th. Whereas if you don't make it into Q2, in Q1 you could be 5th in that session, which is like another 5 positions back again. You're 17th, 18th. And I think, to be honest, a lot of people who maybe don't qualify as well, if you think Morbidelli's not qualified as well, he's going to be ultra aggressive on this lap to get back to where he should be, or for anyone else for that matter. But I just feel maybe the final third qualifying position, so the bottom, we'll say third of the grid, definitely would be a bit more risky on the opening lap trying to make something happen. I think maybe a lot of times he just gets caught up in that. And again, it doesn't look like that is a good race bike. It shows that he can still go fast consistently around a 40-minute race, but he just showed again he couldn't really do much even with the weather. It brought him back in close to the group. It's actually it's good to see him, but at the same time though, the more you see him, you're like, oh my god, I can see so many problems with his bike. It's kind of sad to watch him because I still have the memories of 21 and 20 and 22 of him really just doing absolute bits on that bike and making his own opportunities to win himself a championship title as well. So I suppose there's not much else to talk. I wouldn't say they've made a massive step. They had a new chassis this weekend that seems to improve the agility, but
he's been better really the last couple of rounds. I think maybe that's conditions that have played into that a little bit, but he was pretty good at the low grip Aragon, which is a track he's not gone well at. Here he was good all weekend, but they did test prior, so it's worth noting that. But
yeah, definitely.
He was battling in the top 10 all weekend, and Rins was battling in Rins like 20th. So I mean, I know Rins is a bit beaten up still, but
yeah. It still shows, and as we've kind of always known, I think last year a few times at Morbidelli where the bike was off it and Morbidelli was closer, when the bike has the potential, it's always Fabio who can make that last 1%, or he can pull a race out of it or something. It's always down to Fabio that last small bit, then he gets out of it, which we obviously know, we don't doubt anything of his ability, but it just shows a lot of time you're watching him, it's just the bike is protesting in so many different ways, and you just think, oh my god, what a poor man to have to keep getting on that week in, week out. Now we have a big test, I suppose technically today at some point as you're hearing this, Monday the 9th of September. So another test today as well as then the weekend in 2 weeks for the other Misano. So I'll be interested to see when we get to the second Misano, will they have made a step from the test? I'm not too sure if they will or not.
Because the others will have caught up, I think they'll be
sure,
worse.
Yeah.
Because they had the test beforehand. Whereas everybody else will have more data.
Yeah, they had
we've seen more
exactly,
data, more rubber down. The others just go forward and the Yamahas go backwards. But I do have one thing to say, right? Do you think he's going to pick up a top 5 at some point over this flyaway period? Do you think it's possible?
I think it is, but not on genuine pace. I think it's going to be another Van der Leek of last year where like people crash, dirty racetrack, people run on, right out devices sticking on, and somehow he's like third.
Yeah. Oh, third, we're saying. All right. Bit of
I think that's just a ball.
There you go. I think Dill says, podium for Fabio Quartararo at Mandalika confirmed. He's just said it right there.
When it happens now, I'll look like an absolute god. But anyway, there's one thing we need to kind of just finish on the podcast before we end it off. And that is 93 versus number 1 versus 89, Rhys. First off, do you see three of them? Do they all have a chance of winning this title? I know there's two obvious answers to two riders, but mainly, I know you've already kind of answered it, but I'll ask you kind of again, just in this segment. Can Marquez really actually win this title?
You've missed 23 off there. He's about the same. It's pretty mean. Well, a few weeks ago, people were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It isn't 2003 anymore. I don't think anyone can qualify as bad as him and win titles, really, so...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, what is the gap? Is it 50 something now? Again?
I will tell you.
It's still big. It's not ideal, but he gained a big chunk back today, and he gained quite a bit last week. Well, actually, he didn't gain that much because Martin was really good in Aragon, actually.
53.
Yeah, 53. It's quite a big gap.
It's huge.
I wouldn't rule him out completely because we've seen Bagnaia and Martin self-destruct many times, both of them. And yes, okay, there's the crash Kez jokes that you see online because he's crashed a lot of times this year, but I think that's when he's stretching for positions that he just can't do. He was desperate to get that first win, so he was pushing a bit too hard for it in a few situations. Whereas now he's done it, and he's done it again. I think the confidence is there, he believes he can do it, but also if he does start to think he's in with a shout, he'll probably start looking at the points again and actually taking them a bit more. I could see him. I think he'll pick up another win or two over this flyaway period. I think that's clear now that if the conditions are a bit weird, he's pretty capable of doing it, and it's more likely to happen in this period. You know, you go to those tracks, weird conditions, tracks he's performed well at, he could gain a few points back. Valencia, he's godly at Valencia. It's a left-hand track again. It's low grip because it's always cold, and you remember the pre-season last year. His first day on the Ducati, he was faster in the lefts than all the other Ducati riders, so it kind of does show you. So it's possible, and you know, I wouldn't absolutely scoff at the idea, but yeah, it's pretty unlikely. But he's chucked too many points away. If he hadn't, basically, if he'd actually finished races earlier on in the year, I'd say absolutely now that he's on this run of form. But no, it's between Bagnaia and Martin, and I just still have the. I don't know between those two. I really don't know because one of them's just gonna exactly. We're probably saying the exact same thing last year. It'll be decided by one of them chucking it on the road for no reason, basically, or doing something really stupid for no reason, because they both do it pretty constantly. And I mean, even the last 2 weekends, they've both had no scores. I mean, sure, all right, one of them was contact with Alex Marquez, but and we apportioned blame to Alex Marquez. But as I did also say last week, it always seems to happen to Bagnaia and not really anybody else. So at that point, you kind of have to be like, well, you know, if you're having that many racing incidents with people, maybe it's a little bit to do with your approach. So I'll pass the same question back to you, but yeah, I just still don't see it because I think when it's a normal weekend, he doesn't have a fair chance to beat them. But if it's a weird weekend, he absolutely can gain some points back. But the gap is just a bit too big, I think.
For Marquez to win the title, for me, it'll have to be the other two kind of imploding and a lot of weather between now and the end of the year. If we for example, I'm trying to think now. So, Mandalika, I don't see him winning that outright unless it's a very dirty track and it's a whole.
So Quartararo again, it has to
podium,
be. But
well, yeah,
but
so his first have to be Quartararo. So that's going to age well.
Quartararo Marini 1-2. Is that what you?
Augusto Fernandez 3. Anyway, I'm going to keep digging my hole. I'm going to double down. For Mandalika, the only way I see him winning there again is if the conditions are that bad, and it's like Aragon where it's one of those where it's a leveler, brings him forward and he's closer. Because I still think every race track, regardless of conditions, you expect a GP24 to have a quarter of a second on merit. Sepang, don't really see him again unless it's wet. I don't see him being able to make the jump. Motegi, I think definitely not, because that's such a stop-start track, and Pecco's so good on the brakes. Without weather, I don't see that being one. What have I not mentioned? Thailand, it's kind of a bit of a basic track, but again, it's a lot of heavy braking, a lot of slow accelerations. It'll just favour the GP24. It's going to sound stupid, but again, if there's weather, he'd be the man I'm betting on. If there's weather between now and Valencia, he's the best man on the good for, because he was always pretty good at it, but again, you can train. Miguel Oliveira was good, Brad Binder's good, Jack's good. There's a couple of other riders where you go, good wet weather riders, they'll pull his result out. But Mark, especially on the Ducati. The Ducati was always good in the rain because it was a bit of a leveler to its weak front end. I still think that's kind of an issue. And I think in the wet, that Ducati is an absolute dream. I think it's still one of the best, probably the best bike on the grid in the rain, regardless of all the electronics and stuff. I think just mechanically, just the way it's set up, is such an advantage in the rain. But I don't see him doing it on merit. I don't see him going to Motegi, to Sepang and beating Jorge Martin and Pecco just because of the equipment. I don't think it's anything down to rider. And I actually have one more question for you that I haven't in my notes. I meant to put it in a while ago, but it's escaped my mind. I'll finish my segment and throw it back. But yeah, just for me, the rest of the season it'll come down to conditions and the others' mistakes more than can Marquez do an ungodly ride and ride 4 or 5 tenths quicker than anyone else and make the difference. That I don't see that happening. I don't think you can anymore in GP. It's gone to F1 like where equipment is too much of the percentage, or the pie chart is made up by too much of the bike you're on instead of your ability and your team around you. So unfortunately, for the Marquez fans listening, I don't think you can unless we have some funky stuff going on in the rest of the season. Between the other two, it's quite sad that we have boiled down the championship down to which one of them messes up less, when they're both unbelievable
last
riders.
year, so it's not much.
It's exactly true. It's just a bit sad to think because Pecco is unbelievable, Jorge Martin is unbelievable. Yet we're sitting there going, I don't know who's going to win it, but whoever doesn't make the mistakes. And it can kind of sound stupid. Obviously, whoever wins makes less mistakes. But when it comes to these two, they're going to make more mistakes between now and Valencia, and that's just a fact of life. I probably lean still Pecco, because it just seems like anytime Jorge Martin gets a lead, he shoots himself in his foot. And I think just the whole Ducati factory team, that big bright red team out of Bologna, just seem to have a bit of wizardry when they need it, and they can just pull it out of the fire at the last minute. And I think that'll edge it to Pecco. But like last week, I'm well aware what I said after Aragon, that it was definitely advantage Martin. But of course, this weekend it's gone the way it is, and now we're back down to 6-7 points between each other, and I'm kind of favouring Pecco in the run-in, provided he doesn't screw up as much. But the question I have, and again, it's after watching, I suppose, a lot of the season as well as the last 2 rounds, who's your champion for next year? Do you think is Marc Marquez coming into next year on a factory GP25 the heavy favourite, or is it kind of like Rossi Lorenzo 09 where like could kind of go either way? You could argue a battle. Rossi could do it, Lorenzo could do it. Is it that kind of style where two kind of mega riders going in the same team have a 50-50, or is it heavily one rider's advantage?
Well, I feel like 09 was still like Rossi went in his favourite. I think 10 was more like, which one of them, because they were so close the year before. But
the thing in 10 though was that Rossi topped every pre-season test and had the best pre-season he ever had. So if you're going off the pre-season with that, you would say Rossi's 10th world title was a shoe-in, sorry. So again, it's kind of hard to. I understand the point you're making, but I suppose maybe like 15. I suppose you could maybe argue who would win it, Rossi or Lorenzo, that kind of thing. But I think maybe some of them years.
That year, to be fair.
Yeah, true.
I think we're getting a bit off topic potentially now.
100%, yeah, exactly.
So which years Rossi could have won his 10th championship, gone in as favourite? So I'm surprised Rossi tops the pre-season, but there you go. It's,
yeah, I did a bit of reading back in that year once, and you see, he was never that good at pre-season. It's pretty obvious that the guy that doesn't like just going around in circles for fun. But he had a very good pre-season and had a very good advantage in pre-season, topped all the tests, which was very unlike him. And then Madonna broke his leg.
So basically, he did a Maverick Vinales.
Yes.
He topped all the pre-seasons and then just did nothing. Anyway, what was the question?
Is Marquez favourite for next year, or is it a 50-50 between Pecco and Marquez?
Well, actually, I'm going to have a bit of a long answer for this, because why not? I've gone back and forth on this a little bit the entire season, because I was one of those people that thought this year absolutely Marquez is title favourite, and I thought he was going to like mop him up basically. I didn't think he was going to win like every race or anything like that. I mean, I did almost jokingly put a bet on that as a joke, but like I thought he was going to win a lot of races, and he's probably going to win most of the races. Like, I'll be completely honest, I was totally wrong about that, obviously, but I think given the gaps that have been between current and previous year bikes in the past, I don't think it was an unfair assumption to assume he was going to win quite a few races. But clearly the gap is quite big this year. And as it's gone on as well, the season's gone on and he's gone further and further without winning. He's had more of these front-end crashes. I've started to think that maybe his riding style just doesn't gel with the Ducati particularly very well, which I think is the case to an extent. I think he's had to adjust his riding style quite drastically, of course, for that. But I just thought, is it going to get there? Like, he's got pace. Like, obviously, he's still getting quite a lot out of the bike, but it just can't quite lean on it the way he would on the Honda. And he can't quite, just perform. But the last few rounds, he's just seems to have kind of got on top of that. Almost like the little crash at the Red Bull Ring was like the last sort of just piece of the puzzle all he needed. And obviously Aragon, he absolutely mopped up there. So he showed that like if the conditions are in his favour, then he absolutely can win. And then again here, to be fair, this one wasn't like tricky conditions. Like it was tricky conditions for a couple of laps. That's what gave him his advantage. But then he was just quicker than them in the dry part of the race after that as well. And he looked like he'd had good performance. And this one, I think, will maybe he'll maybe feel this one was like more of, not that the other one wasn't merited, because obviously it was, he absolutely dominated them, but this one was a bit more normal, even though there was the weirdness in the middle. Like half the race after that was still absolutely fine, and he set the fastest lap during that period, so clearly conditions were good because they were better than they were earlier on in the race. So yeah, I think yeah, he probably does go in his favourite, because he's still making a lot of mistakes, so there is that, but I think he is just trying to push for that difference in spec. Like he's trying to override to make the difference, whereas if he doesn't have to do that anymore, I think, yeah, in a proper pre-season, like obviously he missed a lot of the pre-season because of mechanical issues. He had more mechanical issues this weekend, I'm pretty sure, as well. So it just, being in that factory team alongside Bagnaia, also seeing Bagnaia so regularly, he'll probably be able to play some more games with him, because I think Bagnaia is a little bit susceptible to that a little bit. With the whole, I mean, he seemed absolutely baffled after Aragon, for example, when Marquez had out-qualified him. Like, it seemed to bother him quite a lot. I think he will be able to get under his skin. So, yeah, I think actually going into the next season, I think Marquez perhaps does go in his favourite now, because he's sort of getting to grips with the Ducati. He's going to be on the same equipment. He's shown that in these weird conditions, he absolutely wipes the floor with them. So, like, he's got guaranteed race wins for next year based on the back of that. And when it gets a bit tough, when it gets a bit weird, now that when he goes to his favourites, he's probably going to win at those next year now that he's on top of them. And yeah, I think he is going to be pretty tough to beat. I don't think, again, I'm not going to make the same mistake of thinking he's going to win like every race or win like most of the races. I don't think it's going to be quite that much, but I think he could do one of those seasons where he's on the podium every race. I do believe he's capable of doing that next year.
I'll be more blunt, and I think, we're in for another couple of years of Marquez dominance unless Acosta gets his finger out and gets a KTM up there. I
don't think it's his fault that the KTM's not there. Put your finger out, Pedro. Come on, stop crashing, trying to beat.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop overriding it.
But the issue I have is Jorge Martin's on Aprilia. Aprilia don't turn up half races. That's
going to be a shame. Like, I was thinking that earlier.
When's the last time Aprilia was fast? Was it Silverstone? I don't even know when they were there. Like it feels like the last month or so Aprilia have turned into the 2017 Aprilia, where they're just like
rapid in FP1 in Aragon.
Shock. So that's Martino with a title already in my eyes, unless they make a step. Again, mate, like Alessia retiring, Maverick is literally the most thermostat rider. Hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. So maybe Jorge Martin can find some sort of, again, the Jorge Martin Aprilia story is a really interesting one, because you just don't know where that package is at and where they can end up.
Yeah, Alessia and Maverick are both really hot and cold, and so is Ralph Fernandez, and so is Oliveira. So all four riders on that bike blow hot and cold, so it's hard to tell, isn't it?
So, like, for a big part of it will be, like, seeing what a top tier, kind of an A-list rider can do on that Aprilia. So, but you still don't think it's going to be better than what he's on now, where he's not going to be able to beat them regularly or whatever. Pecco's making too many mistakes, put up against the greatest of his generation, Marquez. Even injured Marquez, even slightly older Marquez, even Marquez, who probably doesn't suit that bike as well. He seems to have a lot still in advantage in places. I think next year, on equal equipment, I think Marquez will win a lot more next year. And I think I'm kind of worried for it, because obviously, I respect Marquez. I'm not a fan of his. I personally am not a Marquez fan.
Shock, Dill
I think we could be in.
469 is not a it's not a fan of Marc
I know,
Marquez.
I know, shock, right? I know. Who would have saw that coming? But I think next year we could be in for a lot of probably what we saw today. Pecco just not having enough to beat Marquez. Again, today was there was a lot more to go on than just two guys with two bikes going at it for a race win. But I could see another Portimao happening. I think I the way I look at it is, right, I think what we saw in Jerez this year, where Pecco and they went head to head and Pecco managed to come out on top, we'll see that at some places. We'll see 2018 Marquez, 2017 Marquez at Texas, where he just has enough of an advantage. What he did in Aragon last week, we'll see a lot of that, a lot of tracks. I think still maybe at like certain tracks, like maybe Assen, Pecco will have an advantage and still be able to win, but I don't think Pecco will win as many races next year. I'd be surprised if he's wins as much next year. I still think Pecco will lose a lot of points next year to Mark in sprints. I think the sprint format is much more suited to Mark over Pecco. I think Pecco, as much as he's an amazing rider, I still think he needs to improve in certain areas and be more consistent over a whole weekend. It's just he seems to not perform enough in the sprints, and I know the argument is he gets 90% of the sprint and then overperforms and does a better job than probably he expected on Sunday, and that kind of balances out the ship. But I just think that up against Mark is on equal equipment for a full season. History has not gone well for many teammates against Mark, and I think Mark now next year will definitely, unless somehow the GP25 is an awful step backwards, which would be very amusing for me if we saw KTM
Digi Antonio champion
next year. And yeah, exactly. Digi Antonio and
although he's going to be on the GP25, isn't he? Actually, never mind.
Yeah, he's on it. Yeah,
Morbidelli.
Frankie.
Morbidelli versus Alex Marquez, round 2.
Oh yeah, exactly. And the Aprilis and the KTMs, but that's kind of the way I see it. Is just I just think Mark against Pecco, he'll just have a bit of advantage. And I think he's a bit more wherewithal about him, so he can kind of play with him even on the racetrack, even in the heat of battle. So
even in the press conference, plays about with him.
Yeah, but Pecco seems to think that doesn't affect him, and I don't think it is. I think that what affects Pecco is why he sees on track. I think he makes some rash decisions based off what happens to him on track. So true. I think that's where his slight weakness in mental clarity can come. But I'm basically condemning the whole of next year that it's going to be a Mark Marquez riot without seeing him ride next year's bike, just based off of the last
later
rounds.
Today, probably. I think he'll get his first go on it, by the sounds of it. So
yeah, there'll be something for next year anyway, and that'll be So yeah, you could be listening to this podcast while also reading something on your phone about how Marquez is like 15 seconds quicker than Pecco on the new GP25, and Armageddon is here for next year. But yeah. Rhys, have you any other final points before?
Back at him and on the track. That's what we'll be doing.
I'd imagine so. Have you any final points before we end off this podcast?
No, I don't think so, to be honest. I think we have
one more topic.
We have we?
Repsol Honda.
Oh, of course. Yep. That's it's not been added to the notes, but yes, I did forget about that. There's going to be not a Repsol logo. Not really surprising,
to be honest.
No, it's been rumoured for like quite a few years it's going to be happening.
It's been rumoured since like 2016.
Yeah, but it's been really heavily rumoured since like basically Jerez 2020 that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because they've been like so poor. And it sounded like they almost were going to leave with Marquez this year, but they've just seen out the last year the contract. Already this year we've seen reduced sponsorship, but
I think the writing was on the wall with the bike this year with such limited
it's
Repsol.
like a HRC bike with a bit of Repsol on it, whereas this going to be a big thing because it's only a sponsor that's on the bike, so I suppose it's not that big of a deal, but because it's such an iconic sponsor, like this is going to be like the first time in a lot of like MotoGP fans' lives that there hasn't been a Repsol Honda on the grid. I mean, it's the first time in my lifetime it'll be the case, and imagine a lot of people listening as well. I know there obviously are some people that will probably remember the Rothmans days before that, and I don't know who sponsored them previously before that.
Back before that, they were just HRC as kind of it was just a Honda factory effort, I suppose. But I suppose 94 was the doing
Yeah, there was that 1 year, wasn't there? They had Rothmans, and then they had nothing, and then they had Repsol when Crivier turned up. So
Yeah,
it was.
Crivier,
It's like, I remember like
with,
MotoGP 20. There was that weird like HRC bike. So was that the real livery? So yeah, interesting. It's in the middle of the 90s, just out of nowhere. But yeah, it will be. I mean, to be honest, you don't see the bike anyway. So I suppose.
Yeah, exactly, and that's probably why they're leaving.
Yeah, because they're spending a lot of money on sponsorship, and
see.
I mean, it wasn't even the race today. They're both. I mean, I know they can't help being ill, but you know, literally there was no chance to see it. You didn't even see it getting picked up out the gravel this week. So, yeah, it is dire times for Honda. And actually, I did read an article on the race actually where they were saying that perhaps it's a good thing because the weight of Repsol Honda, like how dominant they've been in the past, like it's probably not great on the team. It's look at where Repsol Honda are now, whereas it's almost. I know it's still HRC, but it's not quite maybe got the same aura around it as Repsol Honda does. I mean, it's been around for... That brand will be associated with Honda till the end of time, effectively, at this point, because it's been so many championships and stuff won under that livery. And yeah, it's will be an interesting one. It will be hard to not keep calling them Repsol Honda. That will be the biggest issue, I think. But, I mean...
Yeah, it'll be just factory HRC, I suppose, next year.
Yeah, just be like the... Actually, I'm interested. I wonder if it will just be like the HRC wildcard delivery and the World Superbike one they have. I wonder if it'll be the...
I'd say it will be, unless they kind of upgrade the Castrol one. Get Castrol as their full factory Castrol bike. That would be very cool.
Could see a Domitsu, maybe. Could take over a bit more, don't know. I suppose that's all they do on the LCR, but since the Honda Team Asia team, you know... Maybe
they could go full Honda factory Team Asia.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
There's a lot they can do with it, I suppose, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the Spencer kind of current test rider, just red, blue, white, and Honda written down the side of it.
Yeah, potentially.
Maybe kind of do what McLaren Honda did in the 2015, where
Chrome,
or was it 2014, where they kind of really stripped it back and it was just McLaren Honda until they got themselves back, and then kind of built themselves up from the ashes. I suppose they could kind of go back to just being a Honda team. And try and take as much pressure off.
I'm sure Honda would love to be reminded of that period of time. Pretty much as dire as that, so yeah.
It's equally as bad at the moment in GP for them.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, the bike doesn't seem unreliable. Just slow.
Yeah, true.
It's like you see it break down sometimes. I remember seeing Marino did it break down at like Assen. It will be weird, but I am interested to see what they do with the livery, but I suppose ultimately we're not going to see much of that bike anyway. I think it'll be a long time till they're even approaching the front, especially since they're not even the top Honda team. The LCR team have been thrashing them this year. Zarco's actually been having a pretty good season.
Yeah, he's crept under the radar. Unfortunately, it's just been P14 here and there and stuff like that. But in terms of if you put him up against the two factory boys, he's had a very good season, and he's also, I know Marini is a newcomer to that bike, but Mir's been on it now for a bit of time, and Zarco has been unbelievable on it, really, because even Marquez on it. Marquez was better than the rest, but he still was better than the rest and crashing, whereas Zarco seems to be consistently just better and not crashing as much. So Zarco's doing a real stellar job, and I think he's not really getting the respect. I think right now I'm respecting Zarco more for what he's doing now than what he was doing on the Ducati finishing.
He's underperforming on the Ducati. No, he's overperforming.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the difference is with Marquez though, like he was outperforming them by more. Marquez would have been crashing out of like top tens, whereas they're that's exactly it. Marquez couldn't accept it, could he? He couldn't accept finishing that low down, which makes sense because he's never finished that low down his entire career, and he just went all of a sudden, even back end of 21, he was still winning races. He went from that to all of a sudden not even getting in the top 10. It's a bit of the anti Fabio Quartararo, whereas like he fights as much as he can, but he doesn't usually go over the limit, whereas Marquez just cannot accept finishing 10th. He will crash to try and finish 5th.
Yeah. So on that sad note, Repsol Honda is no more at the end of the year. We're going to end this podcast. If you are listening on YouTube, if you could drop the video a like, and if you are on Spotify, big shout out, actually, we just hit 1,000 followers on Spotify. Completely escaped my mind till I mentioned the word Spotify. So if you are listening on Spotify, thank you all for the support over on a different platform for both of us other than the usual YouTubes. But yeah, hope you've enjoyed. Drop a like on YouTube, give it a 5-star rating on Spotify if you wouldn't mind, and then you can leave comments down below the podcast on Spotify. Thanks for listening. See you in 2 weeks again from Misano.